Everyone, Grandmaster Ben Feingold here again with our series on the Caro-Kann. Hope you're enjoying the opening series so far. This video will concentrate on the advanced variation, probably in the last 10 years, the most common at the Super Grandmaster level. So the advanced variation is very similar to the advanced French defense, except this pawn's here instead of back here, and this pawn's here. And it's e5. You advance. And you gain space. And in the French defense, black plays a very early c5 because he hasn't moved his pawn yet. And in the Caro-Kann, we can move our bishop out, which we can't do in the French defense because our pawn's on e6. So the most common move is bishop f5. You can also play c5 with black and just, you're sort of a tempo down on the advanced French, but you might be happy you're a tempo down because you didn't play e6. That's the tempo. So maybe your bishop can get out later. Okay, c5 is relatively rare. It's usually what I play. Bishop f5 is the main line. Now, in the 1960s and 70s and 80s, everybody played knight c3 and g4, okay, which is super complicated. If you have black, you should know this because it gets really sharp. White's playing like h4, and white's playing knight e2 to f4, and there's just a lot of theory in this position. And Yasser Seirawan has a lot of interesting games in this variation in the late 70s and 80s because he plays black in the Caro-Kann. Okay, now people aren't doing that so much. They're playing the short variation, and they play more complicated variations also. The short variation just says, I'm just going to develop my pieces. Eventually, I'm going to win this bishop for my knight. I'll have the two bishops and more space. And this is where a lot of the theory is in the last 15 years is starting in this position. And, you know, it's sort of uncomfortable for black. He can't go here, can't go here. And white has more space. And, you know, white's position looks reasonable. And basically, if black can safely develop his minor pieces in castle, it's probably going to be better, because he'll have a better structure. He'll be able to attack this pawn. And unlike with c5, unlike in the French defense, the bishop isn't here. It's on f5, which is a lot better. So this is like the beginning of the variation for super GMs. And some players with black will play knight d7. Some will play knight e7. Some will play h6. And it's the start. Now, more complicated ways to play for white, which are very interesting, are moves like h4. Okay, it's sort of a trap too. If you play the normal e6, you lose a piece. Your bishop's trapped. If you go here, I go here, and then you lose your bishop. So after h4, you can't play e6. You should play either h6 or h5, and there's a big argument at the top level about which move is better. I've played h5, I think the one time I had this position and I won, but I don't know which move is better because I think nobody knows which move is better. That's more style. The difference is if you play h5, okay, which stops g4 temporarily, you might lose that pawn. White can play knight here, bishop here. He's got a lot of guys on that pawn. So you might lose the pawn or you might not care. You literally don't care if you lose the pawn because you'll have an open file for your rook, and white's wasting 5 tempi winning an h-pawn, and you're developing and attacking the center. Or you could say, I don't want to lose the pawn, I want to just play h6, and if white goes crazy, fine. And one of the good things about not playing e6 too early when they're pushing their pawns is you can change tack and just put the bishop on d7 and just play a French defense kind of position where for some reason they're trying to trap your bishop, which isn't there. So for example, if white plays g4, most grandmasters might play bishop here or bishop here, but it's perfectly reasonable to go here and just play e6, c5 and play a French defense down a tempo or two. But like, what's that all about? Well, that's about trying to trap your bishop and gain space. If your bishop isn't there, then. So avoiding e6 too early makes sure your bishop never gets trapped. So h4 is common, knight f3 is common, and knight c3 used to be the main move. So if you ever go back in a time machine and go back to the 60s and 70s, you better learn this variation. It's pretty sharp. Probably should learn it now. And if you play that with white, your opponents might not be familiar with it because it's not popular anymore, but it's very complicated. And if you look at a lot of Yasser games with black, they're really exciting in this variation where white's basically just playing crazy to try to punish black. And you could also play c5. Whoa. You can also play c5 and just try to play knight c6, put your bishop to g4, pinning the knight if it goes there, and just develop normally. And sometimes you're sacrificing a pawn. Sometimes white takes this pawn and you don't get it back. That happens. And sometimes you sack a pawn and you're okay. c5 is not as common. So if you make that your pet line and you learn it, your opponents probably won't be as familiar as they are with bishop f5. The advanced variation is very common now. So just looking at Grandmaster games the last 2 or 3 years in the Caro-Kann, you're more likely to see e5 than anything else. The plurality of games will be with e5, I think. This is Grandmaster Ben Feingold. Hope you enjoyed the Caro-Kann series. And we'll be back week after week with more series on openings. This was the advanced variation. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.